as an anthropologist and someone who's studied going back through time, like we've had all this introduction of junk in the diet. I mean, I can only say it's junk, you know, highly processed foods and different sort of mixtures of just, I suppose, just chemicals that we ingest on a daily basis. Like, given enough time and enough evolutionary stress, would we adapt to that? Would we be able to extract nutrients after, you know, a million years?
It's a
or
question
is it
that
kill us?
it's a question that I think about all the time. So, couple things to think about as far as evolutionary change is concerned. One thing is that, you know, we used to think, and this is decades ago, we used to think that evolutionary change was this small, slow, gradual change that happened over time. And we now know that even though that is one mechanism for it, another aspect is something called punctuated equilibrium. In other words, that, you know, things can be the same for a while, then all of a sudden there's something that's so drastic that happens and required that it happens fairly quickly, at least in evolutionary terms, in several generations at least, right? And we know with other organisms that reproduce rapidly, we can see this change, sometimes genetic change, in a matter of hours, right? For humans, it's obviously different because of the way we reproduce and how long it takes to come to childbearing age. So with that said, we do see things changing in shorter periods of time. Like, for example, we have the introduction of dairy into our diets. I mean dairy as adult humans drinking dairy from other animals. It happened at least 8,000 or 9,000 years ago. From the time, you know, most of us think that's a long time ago, but from the perspective that I'm talking about, millions of years, 8,000 or 9,000 years ago is not that long. And we do see in several populations in Europe and several populations in Africa a genetic change that allows lactose tolerance into adulthood. One thing to remember is that lactose intolerance is not weird. Lactose intolerance is what happens almost all the time with mammals after they get weaned off their mothers. They suppress or lose the ability to produce the enzymes needed to safely and efficiently digest dairy, right, after they get weaned. So it isn't just a human thing. And it is a common thing in humans. 60% of modern day humans are lactose intolerant. What's weird is that some of us can consume dairy as adults, and that we can because of these independent genetic mutations that happen in areas where dairy was incredibly important in our diets. And again, mostly in Europe or Africa. And so there's 40% of us that have some level of lactose tolerance as adults. That's crazy. 8,000 or 9,000 years ago is not that long. And it didn't happen then. It happened somewhere between now and then. So the question, can we, you know, genetically change because of all the crap that allows us to have that crap? Possibly. But the danger part of it is this. We have this perception, I think, that we're just going to, you know, that most species just continue to live and continue to live and continue to live. The reality is, it is estimated that 99% of all the species that ever lived on this planet have become extinct. 99% have become extinct. So it's kind of a Russian roulette kind of question. I mean, I understand the question, but I hope we don't have to rely on evolutionary change to I hope we can figure out something culturally in the meantime that allows us to not eat that kind of junk. But
I mean, is that the 99% extinction rate? Is that just because you have, you know, just a slightly more developed sort of evolutionary version of that animal that's just sort of surpassed the last sort of version of it, if that makes sense? So
yeah, I mean, we have this idea, sort of. We have this idea that of the survival of the fittest, right? Which first of all, something Charles Darwin never said. He never ever said survival of the fittest. The way that when I used to teach evolution, the way that I used to teach it is, I would say, you know, forget the survival of the fittest, because that's not the case. It's actually demise of the least weak. So, and it's more like that joke. If you're trying to outrun a bear, you don't have to be the fastest. You just can't be the slowest. So, in an evolutionary perspective, you know, if you're in a certain environment and there's a limited amount of resources, a limited amount of whatever, and there's a bunch of different species vying for survival, you know, the ones that are the best, you know, the straight A students are going to make it through. the B and C and even D students are probably going to make it through as well. It's the ones that are failing that aren't going to pass on to the next generation. So yeah, there's a lot of mechanisms happening for it, but it's the ones that can no longer, literally, there's only two things you have to do in order to not go extinct: reproduce, and that offspring has to be able to reproduce as well. That's it. Come to childbearing age, reproduce, protect that offspring until that comes to childbearing age, and do it. And that comes down to reproductive success. That comes down to safety, and it comes down to the ability to nourish ourselves and our young.
Okay, that's interesting, because the one of the things that always sticks in my mind is that, have we reached a peak of evolution because there's such a long survival rate? So many people survive to that childbearing age, and the evolutionary stresses that we had before, ability to find nutrients, like nutrients are so available now, and people can reach to 25, 26. I suppose there are other evolutionary stresses that will say, like reduction of fertility rates and all these other things. But that's stuck in my mind that there's not necessarily the things around the corner, the predators around the corner that there used to be, that would be evolutionary stresses.
I love this podcast today because we get to talk about things that I haven't got to talk about on podcasts for so long. Okay, so when every semester when I would teach any sort of human evolution, the first thing I would do, literally the first day of class, after everybody introduced themselves, and I'd get on the board and I'd write a word across the board, and it's called teleology or teleological, and that means directed, and it is the thought about evolution that most of us have, that it's towards a certain goal. In other words, we can sit here and say, okay, we're all working towards this. Now, for most of us, from a human sense, we sit on this sort of throne and look down and say, okay, we're here, right? Because our brains are bigger than they've always been. We have the ability to live to a certain age, and we have schools, and we have education, and we have this, and all these sorts of things. That's a very, from right now, our perspective, this second, that seems like a goal. Big brains, all the things that we enjoy as modern day humans. But the reality is, as soon as that environment changes, and our environment that can change either in a natural sense or in a cultural sense, all of those things that we think are benefits could be detrimental and could kill us. And that's the point, that, for 3.5 million years, for millions of years, for billions of years, the only constant in the world is change. The environment is always changing, hot and cold, wet and dry, all of this. So whatever is the most well adapted at this moment could literally become extinct tomorrow. So the fact that we have huge brains and compared to other animals, are actually incredibly weak. And the ability for us to have these houses and live in these very sterile environments and sound really, really good, but no amount of education is going to, help us, or no amount, if the world literally changes tomorrow, in regards to a lot of different factors, where we become the least well adapted in that new environment. The thing going for humans, though, is that cultural piece. We are living in both a natural environment and a culturally created environment, where we can control all sorts of things through technology. And then listen, my head is stuck in the past. When I say technology, I'm thinking stone tools and fire, not the internet and Vitamixes. But we do have that ability to buffer some of that change through technology. We can create, furnaces in our basement, or air conditioners we were talking about earlier. We can modify our food. We can do a lot of different things that might help. But the reason I even bring that up is, we should all be thinking about evolution from a non-teleological sense. That right now, at this moment, the way our bodies are and what we're doing might make sense, but tomorrow, those same things that are good traits might actually be the thing that kills us.